Welcome back. I have an enormous amount of books to cover. I'm going to start with the best. I got this on credit on a Whatnot auction. I ended up paying a grand total of about 20 bucks with a sticker price of around 100 because I have so much credit, or had so much credit until I bought this built up on that platform. So I just paid shipping and tax on this. And I haven't seen it yet. And I'm going to actually put on some gloves to handle this, not because it's a fragile book, although it might be, but because it is an antique green book. Antique green books, hardcovers with green covers. Apparently, a lot of them were made with arsenic, and it can leach into your skin. This is probably overkill. I don't think you necessarily have to do that or do this. There's there's an antiquarian postcard in here. Oh my God, this is so gorgeous. This is a copy of Paradise Lost by Milton with the Gustave Doré illustrations. And this is a book that I've long intended to read, although it is daunting. It's apparently very difficult. There's the Gustave Doré illustrations. Someone I have just long loved. And that was 20 bucks, very well spent. And if I do end up reading it, I don't know if I'm going to end up reading this copy. I mean, I probably should because it is so cool. But that's more just something that I wanted to own, regardless of what happens. I'm going to put it in the shade out of the sun. I know it's kind of a bright day, bright windy day. I'm actually going to cover it with my jacket. I don't know, like, just on the open market, so to speak, how much that would be worth. But I feel I got a pretty good deal. I spent $3.50 on these. It would be good aesthetically to have the gloves on, but I'm gonna take those off. I got each of these for 3.5 bucks from a public library bookstore. Fantastic Adventures magazines from 1946, I think both of them are. And which one was it? I think it was this one. Ended up being something even more special than I thought. I was originally intending to resell these, but I looked at the table of contents. And let me see if I can do this without potentially damaging this in the wind. Presenting the author, I don't know if you can see, by Margaret St. Clair. This is the first publication ever, anywhere, of Margaret St. Clair's writing. And Margaret St. Clair is a really interesting, special author. Underread, underappreciated. I will say I tried one of her pulp fiction. It was in an ace double, one of her pulp fiction short story collections. I didn't really like it as much as some of the later stuff that I read. I read Search the Sky, was it? I'll show you the cover there. That book is incredible. I got a few more kind of special ones here. See if there's anything that has to be in the video, because there's a chance we may end up running out of batteries. I guess I'll show this one off. This is a first edition hardcover of Nobody Knows My Name by James Baldwin. The condition of it is not super great. It got some water damage, but another special book from a special author. I haven't read Baldwin in such a long time, but truly one of the most incredible figures in literature, I feel. Oh, this is, of course, needing to be included. This was a pot sweetener that got thrown in to get me to buy the Paradise Lost. It's a hardcover collection of The Inner Landscape by Peake, Ballard, and Aldous, which I have in paperback. So one of those will end up getting sold. But this, oh no, it wasn't to sweeten the Paradise Lost pot. It was to entice me to buy this, which I didn't need a whole lot of enticement for. I think I spent like 50 bucks on this. I don't know how much of that ended up being on credit. I think I actually paid out of pocket for this one, but when you see what it is, I think you'll understand why. This is quite rare. This is a pamphlet or a chapbook called News from the Sun by J.G. Ballard. And if memory serves, I think it might actually be signed. I'm not sure. Even if it isn't, this is something that I figured I probably only had one shot at ever, because it's pretty rare. It was a limited print run. Yeah, wow. I had forgotten that indeed it is signed by the Jeej himself. So that is my first signed Ballard. That is never going to be sold. That will be with me until the end times. All right, and then we will get on to the huge box of vintage paperbacks that I got. We'll start with Always Coming Home by Ursula Le Guin. This is a 1986 fantasy book, or 1985, I think it was actually, that is a fictional rehashing of two books that her anthropologist parents wrote, and it's an ethnography of an invented, I think it's meant to be Native American tribe who live in Northern California in a post-apocalyptic far future where I think technology has regressed back to a sort of Stone Age level, and it's split up into different formats. It has essays and poetry and a bunch of illustrations in it, a bunch of maps. Split reviews on this one. People say it's sort of dense, and it feels dense. It feels that way. I am not decided if I want to keep this one or sell it, because this realistically is the kind of book that I would probably only read if it was randomly picked, and the random picks have been good for me and for thee in the past at times, so not counting it out of the question. I got actually a bunch of Gardner Fox books. We'll start with Warrior and Thief of Yarn, or Larn. Gardner Fox was obviously a pulp science fiction writer, but also, more importantly actually than that, he was a comics writer for DC, and he's responsible for inventing a number of pretty famous DC superheroes, including Hawkman. He's responsible for the original idea of the Justice Society of America, which I think you can intuit turned into the Justice League of America. And Guy Gardner, which is the main, not pseudonym, is the main Green Lantern. I don't really know much about Green Lantern. Is named after Gardner Fox. His science fiction output is regarded as really derivative of Edgar Rice Burroughs, especially this specific series, is not credited with doing a whole lot more seemingly than ERB did in his Planetary Romances. This one is meant to be pretty run-of-the-mill pulp science fiction stuff, although it does have a kick-ass first line. I saw myself dying on the other side of the street. This is from 1965. And then this one sounded really interesting. This is like a cosmic horror space opera with a Rogan on the cover called Escape Across the Cosmos. It looked sort of interesting. I don't know. I'm not super interested in this old kind of pulp stuff. Ted White got at least one Frank Frazetta cover. These are all a series, a trilogy, Phoenix Prime, Sorceress of Kar, and Starwolf. This series has a protagonist named Max Quest. I don't know, it doesn't seem all that great to me. I don't know, Ted White, I always get mixed up with James White, who wrote medical science fiction, and actually will make an appearance later in the video, but Ted White seems a little bit questionable, I guess. The New Atom by Stanley G. Weinbaum. This I'm probably going to keep, and I'm probably going to read it along with another book that I will point out later in the haul. This is the first ever published novel, I believe. No, that's not right. It's the first posthumous novel that Weinbaum published. And Weinbaum is a really interesting character that I did not know much about until looking into this book. He wrote for 1.5 years only before dying, and is largely considered to have been on the track to be one of the big names, along with Asimov and Clarke and all of them, in science fiction. And his fictional output, although limited, was enormously influential, especially a short story called Martian Odyssey that is credited as being one of the first short stories that really portrayed alien intelligence in a credible way and kind of injected pulp science fiction with an air of scientific credibility or literary seriousness that it was lacking previously. And this is a kind of a play with, I think, like Nietzschean Overman themes, where this mutant guy who has hands that have 3 joints in the fingers lives amongst human beings and is possessed of a double mind, an idea that I think was later borrowed by Van Vogt. That's my gut feeling. Is an individual of greatly expanded powers of body and mind, living amongst the humans in a sort of like morally ambiguous, self-questioning way, where he's this Superman who doesn't know how to use his powers and is sort of melancholic and philosophical and reflective. And the reputation of this book is sort of mixed. People accuse it of being sexist, which I don't know, very plausibly is. I truly don't know. I've never read Weinbaum, but I'm going to keep that one, I think. I'm going to put that in my pile, my little pile here. These 2 are 2 books in a trilogy. It's a juvenile trilogy about teenage boys having adventures under the ocean. It does have, at least this one, a cool cover. Pretty cover. Not one that really holds my attention much. Ted White, if I were to read one book from him of the ones that I looked into here, it would be this one. It's another Frazetta cover, actually. No, that's Jones. I'm looking at the signature. This is compared to Terminator. It's about a computer that makes this man and releases him into a post-apocalyptic New York filled with mutants. And he goes and rends and reaves and has a sword and sorcery, planetary romance, old time out in the wastes. I don't know. It seems kind of sick. I think I would probably read that. Or at least I wouldn't be disappointed if I randomly picked it. Peter Heath, The Mind Brothers. This is an interesting character. He also wrote, under the name Peter Heath, Fine. Fine was a slightly nefarious character. There's not a lot of information out there about him, but apparently he had a close brush with fame with a book called Night Train, and he never quite got up and over that lip of success and mooched off of his much more successful wife, allegedly, and led a very sad, lonely existence in the latter years of his life, traveling from motel to motel, and writing this kind of under par, over par, how does a golf metaphor work? I don't know. Science fiction, pulp stuff. This one sounds awful. Jason Starr, genius, found himself the focal point of a complex communist plot against America, and as a thoroughly discredited scientist, there seemed to be nothing to do about it. Not until he was joined by Adam Cyber, that is. Adam Cyber, last man or Superman to survive in that bleak future, and Jason Starr's mind brother, all caps. People say this is a very bad book, and I don't know, yet another sort of wish fulfillment, ubermensch science fiction book. Saltflower by Sidney Van Sciok does actually look kind of interesting. This is considered slightly boring. It's her first novel, and it is also described as a Mormon-esque 1984. Uh-oh. Sounds like it could be interesting, sounds like it could be terrible. I don't know. UFOs appear over Tacoma, Washington, and leave behind a seed that a woman eats, and it impregnates her, and she goes to Utah to give birth to an alien child, or gives birth to the alien child and goes to Utah, and then joins a cult, a doomsday cult out in the desert, I don't know, it sounds wild. It's supposed to be okay. Space Viking by H.B. and Piper is an influential, apparently, space opera. One of his more influential books outside of the Fuzzy series, which is really what he's remembered for. This was an influence on an RPG called Traveler. If you were curious about reading Piper, actually, his copyright to a lot of his works has lapsed and it wound up in public domain, so you can read it for free on Project Gutenberg. That's true of seemingly all of his work. There's like 20 books that you can get on Project Gutenberg for free, which is probably poor salesmanship since most of the stuff I am going to sell on a Whatnot auction coming up soon. But if you don't want to pay for it, then you can read it for free. And I think these are Michael Whelan covers, if memory serves. This is his most famous book. It's a story about a mining company who are edging an indigenous, possibly sapient life form out of their native lands on an alien planet. And there's, I think, an anthropologist who stands up on their behalf. This actually came before Word for World is Forest by Le Guin. I wonder if that book has a conscious relationship to this one and to this one. This is the direct sequel, picks up exactly where this one leaves off. And then there was a third one written by Piper that was published posthumously, and then this series got picked up for retreatments by a number of other authors. It was rebooted by John Scalzi in 2011. It's a popular series. A lot of people say it's sort of YA-ish and sort of overly cute. That's how it strikes me. Edmund Hamilton's The Star Kings. Hamilton was one of the original contributors to Weird Tales, was a contemporary of Lovecraft and Howard and all of those guys, but wrote space opera, is one of the foundational space opera writers along with Jack Williamson and E.E. Doc Smith, and married Lee Brackett. But Hamilton is, I tried reading this, can't hold a flame to Brackett. I thought this was awful. This is like the most stereotypical imaginable pulp science fiction. Every sentence ends with an exclamation point. It's about a guy who swaps bodies with an alien prince who is fighting this court intrigue, civil war thing that breaks out. It's a science fiction retelling of The Prisoner of Zenda, which was a huge bestseller. I think kind of forgotten at this point, but I just could not do it. I thought that that might be a Stanislav Fernandez cover, but turns out it is not. Hamilton, I guess, is interesting because of his historical importance and his relationship with Lee Brackett. Had the nickname the World Wrecker because of how catastrophic his space opera stories were. Couldn't do it. This was harder for me to read than E.E. Doc Smith. Speak of the Devil, Edward E. Smith, Galaxy Primes. This is a much later book from him from the 1960s. I think it's 65. Yeah, got it, 1965. It's got a kick-ass cover. This is accused of being a book about four assholes traveling in a spaceship and dominating alien cultures. Both praised for having relatively strong female characters, but also one of the female characters who I intuit based on Goodreads reviews is black, is given the nickname Brownie. You know, like reading this old stuff, it's like playing Minesweeper and half the tiles are mines. You're just gonna hit a mine reading this old stuff, invariably, almost completely invariably. Scion by Joan D. Vinci is her first novel. I'm pretty sure it's her first novel. It's a cyberpunk, at least the first in a series called the Cat series, about a plucky boy named Cat living in a dystopian future, using his psychic abilities on behalf of some evil corporation, and gets involved in a plot. It's supposed to be pleasant, but sort of minor. I've never read Vinci. She was married to Werner for, I think, about a decade, and is underread seemingly, not read nearly as much as Werner. Would be curious to read her. This is one of, historically, the most important ever science fiction books, Slan by A.E. Van Vogt. It is a fix-up. And Van Vogt was if not the pioneer of the fix-up novel, one of the major pioneers, one of the early people to adopt that as a form. That's where you take short stories and then you turn them into a novel. This was a massive bestseller, this huge tentpole book. I don't think that it's as read anymore, and I haven't read it. It's about a persecuted class of mutants in the future who are, I think, genetically engineered and named after the guy who genetically engineered them, have greatly heightened mental and physical powers, but are an underclass persecuted by human beings who don't understand them. This is sort of a common motif, became a sort of cliche in genre fiction and beyond. There apparently was a slogan of the time that fans, quote unquote, fans are slans, meaning that science fiction fans were socially ostracized because people perceived their greatly heightened intellectual powers and superiority, and they were threatened. And that's why they couldn't get dates. Surely everybody respected you after you insisted that they call you a slan. Van Vogt's The Beast, another fix-up, apparently a poor one. A lot of people online saying you should just read the 3 short stories that this was fixed up off of instead of reading this, because they're so ham-fistedly connected together that it's a totally jarring reading experience. Apparently involves like Nazis in caves and weird psychic shit, and it sounds totally bizarre. And I kind of am developing an affinity for Van Vogt. I'm right in the middle of reading a book that I forgot to bring out called the Battle of Forever. Yes, The Battle of Forever. I'll show the cover here because I don't want to get up and go get it. I mean, it's not great, but it's just such a zany, weird-ass book about far future. It's sort of like actually a rendition of Star of the Unborn. Why couldn't I think of the name of the book? Star of the Unborn by Franz Werfel. These enfeebled people living in a bunker underground send an emissary out into the world that is peopled by uplifted bipedal Dr. Moreauian animal men, or Cordwainer Smithian animal men, and there are aliens involved too. It's not great, but it's good, you know. Wizard of Lynn by Van Vogt is a sequel. Don't remember the name of the original book. Post-apocalyptic, far future, sword and sorcery type stuff, or planetary romance type stuff. I don't know, sounds kind of interesting. The Makeshift God by Russell M. Griffin. Griffin is an obscure figure and only put out 2 or 3 books, and this is sort of written in seemingly a very John Brunnerian style. Opens with these news snippets, really cool wraparound art. And I actually am going to rearrange the camera here to give a better angle with the shadows and stuff. I'm really tired of filming outdoors. Change by Anne Maxwell. Maxwell's first book. She took many years to write this. Much more well known as Elizabeth Lowell, a romance writer, and she grew up reading science fiction, claims to have read all of the science fiction books in her local library as a girl, and then read all of the science fiction books in her used bookshop in town, and then wrote this because she had run out of stuff to read. Do I buy it? Not particularly. Could be true. Anyway, this is not considered a great book, and I don't know if anybody really reads it anymore. People definitely read this one, The Many-Colored Land by Julian May, first of the Saga of the Pliocene Exile series of 4 books. Son of a bitch. This does have the Michael Whelan wraparound cover art. The premise is far future sends its dissidents back in time to the Pliocene era, where people run into an unexpected visitor to Earth. Sounds like sort of Hawksbill Station by Silverberg meets space opera. Really beloved by a lot of people, not including Brian Aldiss, I don't think. Or was it Budrus? Someone didn't like it, but most people do, and people tell me to read that all the time. Roderick by John Sladek, which features Boston Rob from Survivor on the cover. Pretty famous book from Sladek, who is an American New Waver who went over to the UK to be part of the New World's boom in the late 60s. And I have to admit to you, every single thing that I read about John Sladek makes me not want to read John Sladek. Apparently, it's like pun-based new wave writing, and he did publish a book that was about an alleged 13th zodiac sign that had been suppressed by the powers that be. They don't want you to know about the 13th sign, as a demonstration of people will buy anything trying to pawn it off as, you know, an actual piece of scholarship. Kind of funny, I guess, but I don't know, they're like James Randi, whatever, like atheist owned stuff. Not super interesting to me. I don't know. I could be self-owning. Maybe I'm a big Sladek fan in a world of trouble. This guy's only book, Robert E. Toomey Jr. I'm going to keep this one because I've come across this a couple of times. I adore the cover, and I never looked into it, and it sounds nuts. It's about this guy who is a secret agent on this world, is connected to this teenager who's like providing logistical support a la Metal Gear through something implanted in his skull. But the guy is incompetent, and he rides around on this hostile death world on this alien with 12 legs, this alien rhino thing. And I probably can't say the detail from the plot synopsis that I read on YouTube, but there's a detail in there that sounds unbelievably nuts. It could end up being terrible, but I don't know. We'll see. I'm probably going to read that one. Recoil in an ace double by Claude and Rhoda Nunes. This is about aliens that come to Earth, try to invade, and unwittingly unleash a latent psychic ability in a band of teenagers and possibly a horse who come together to stave off the alien invasion. A lot of people saying that this cover is bad. This wound up on the bad sci-fi covers subreddit. Shame on you, this cover rules. I really like it, at least. And it's doubled with the Doomarest series, book number 6 by E.C. Tubb, Lalia. And I found a bunch of the Doomarest books at this bookstore where I got most of this. And I passed on them because I see Tubb all the time. I'm just not that interested. I assume that it was just shitty pulp, which it might very well be. But because I had this, number 6, and I felt bad depriving someone who might go and get the rest of the books of number 6, I went back and I just grabbed all of them, especially because I did a little bit of reading about this and about Tubb, and it actually sounds more interesting than I would have anticipated. So these are all Doomarest books. I don't have the full series. It's over 30 books, but it's a bunch of them, and a bunch of them are in DAW editions and are in really nice shape and have some really neat covers, cool covers like this one. And Tubb actually was highly praised by Moorcock, who said that he, Tubb is a British writer as well and did space opera, wasn't, like new wavy, didn't have, pretensions of writing anything other than space opera, that was apparently consciously modeled after the John Stark stories by Lee Brackett. But this turned into its own like multi-decade spanning series that kind of acquired its own character. Moorcock praised it. A lot of people online say that it's better than it seems. It features this protagonist named Doomarest, who is exiled to some distant part of the universe, has to find his way home, a la the Odyssey, a la Star Trek Voyager. And just a lot of these covers I think are really cool. That's probably overexposed, but I think that's a Frazetta. No, that's another Jones. Owned again. I'm not going to show you all of them, but I have at minimum the first 4 or 5 or 6, which is enough to get a taste, certainly. That's a Vincent DeFate cover, I'm pretty sure. Let's see if I did it. I'm trying to get better at, yeah, Vincent DeFate. I'm trying to get better at IDing cover artists, having a mixed time of it. I guess I'm showing you a bunch of these. I don't know, I just am kind of smitten with these. But anyway, the guy like goes on this odyssey through a universe that's been depleted of all of its resources. It sounds neat. All right, I'll stop with the Doomarest books. That's about half of them. I really hope I don't like them. The books that I don't end up keeping here are going to be available on a Whatnot auction. I do live auctions. Everything starts at $3, runs for like 20 seconds. And if you sign up for the auction with the link that I give you, they give you $15 in free credit. And then once you spend above 15 bucks, if you spend above 15 bucks, you don't have to. They give me $5 in credit. That's how I got the Paradise Lost stuff. So it's a win-win, I feel. You still have to pay shipping on top, and I think tax. But a lot of the stuff in my last auction did sell for like $3 to $5, so you can get some very cheap or quote-unquote free books. And there will be a link below. The auction's going to be coming up pretty soon. And I'm going to be doing a bunch of auctions, so if you missed this next one, there will be more. A double in an unusual format of Special Delivery by Chris Neville and Star Gladiator by Dave Van Arnhem. Much less interested in this than I am in this. Chris Neville was considered by Barry Malzberg to have been one of the great unsung heroes of the golden age of science fiction. And apparently Neville just lost interest in writing science fiction, didn't consider it financially lucrative enough to be worth doing, went on to be a world authority in epoxy, worked in industrial chemistry, and periodically would return to science fiction to kind of dip his toe a little bit. Malzberg considered Neville one of the great underrated science fiction writers. And I am gonna, I think, flip this just because there's no chance I don't read this one instead of that one, or at least before I read that one. This is a pretty scarce book, and it's his most famous book. I just kind of saw the Malzberg cosign and stopped digging too hard. And I'm gonna keep this one and almost certainly read it. Someone I'm very interested in is Patricia McKillip. A lot of people have told me that I should read McKillip. I'm developing more of an interest in fantasy writing. I'm seeing the zebra stripes, so I'm hoping that this isn't overexposed. After this book, I'm going to recheck my camera settings. But John Clute also said that McKillip, when she was alive, was probably the best prose stylist in all of fantasy. This is a sequel to a book that I haven't read. Obviously I haven't read it, I've never read her. This is one of her first books, The Throne of the Earl of Cheryl, in a Magic Quest edition. I like these Magic Quest editions. This is from the 70s, I think 74, and it's a 73. It's a kid's fairy tale about a prince or a boy trying to win the hand of a princess in marriage, and in order to appease her father, the king, has to go find an enchanted book of poetry called The Throne. It's supposed to be kind of good. Let me double check my camera here. Hellflower by George O. Smith, a man whose personal biography probably is more interesting than his writing. I don't know, I've never read him. He stole John W. Campbell Jr.'s wife, and I don't know, this is like a space opera thing about a drug called Hellflower that only affects women. Rite of Passage by Alexei Panshin. Pretty famous book, actually, especially for Panshin. This is really his only book that is still read. He's an American writer. Wrote this in response to Heinlein, specifically Orphans of the Sky and Have Spacesuit Will Travel. I've read Orphans of the Sky. I don't really like it very much. Don't really like Heinlein very much for a number of reasons. Would be very curious to read this one. It's about a generation starship that stress tests kids by sending them to survive on an alien planet for 30 days with limited supplies. Panshin also wrote a book about Heinlein, which I would be curious to read if I like this one. Let's put this in the Matt pile, actually. I really am fond of these Ace science fiction specials, and these are kind of scarce, so I'm just going to keep that one. Ice Rigger by good old ADF. This is one of his more celebrated original properties. ADF's big claim to fame is that he was the guy that Hollywood turned to write the movie tie-in novelizations of big movies, including Alien, including The Thing. If you ever find the Alan Dean Foster novelization of The Thing, buy it and keep it if it's less than $100. Very, very rare book. Ice Rigger, it's about a salesman who crash lands on an ice world peopled by an alien called the Trankiki, who are these Batmen who ski, and it's like a survival adventure pulp thing. I don't know. It's supposed to be fun. People like the aliens. This actually, I almost ran on my last Whatnot auction and yoinked it, which I try not to do. I have a bad habit of showing books and then changing my mind. I only do it, in extenuating circumstances like this, because I had not seen this. It might be too washed out, but that is the signature of Wayne Barlow, who is my favorite by a mile genre artist who did artwork for science fiction and fantasy book covers. And he has such a distinct style, especially in his drawing of animals and aliens. If you look at the knees, the joints, the hooves, feet, hands, like you can just spot Barlow almost immediately. And he has very few kind of mimics. I think Vincent DeFate is the only person that has an art style that's kind of close to Barlow. I think it's just gorgeous, and I have started collecting all the Barlow covers, which has led to me owning books that I otherwise would not, including this one. I think this is one of her early books and not considered one of her better ones, kind of run-of-the-mill space opera, but that Barlow cover is just so pretty to me, and I can't let go of them anymore. Crash Course by Wilhelmina Baird, Scottish science fiction writer who published some stuff in the 70s and then took a big hiatus, came back in the 90s to come out with this cyberpunk run of books. I think this is a trilogy. It sounds a lot like Strange Days, the James Cameron movie, a dystopian future where rich people instigate major catastrophes that they can record with technology that can play back to their customers so that they can have the full sensory experience of the people who recorded these big cataclysms, lived through them in a sort of voyeuristic, sadistic way. It kind of mixed reviews, but I guess interesting as a lesser known cyberpunk book. Robert Silverberg's Man in the Maze, apparently a science fiction retelling of a play by Sophocles that I don't remember the title of. It's about a man who is disfigured and goes to live on an alien world that's home to an abandoned labyrinth, and was a commentary about disability that apparently has aged somewhat questionably. I have not read it and would be curious to read it. This is a pretty well-regarded, highly regarded Silverberg book from his period of greatest output or output of greatest work in my experience. The synopsis sounds a lot like Thorns, which is a book that I didn't especially love, but I feel that is one of the canonical, Man in the Maze is a canonical New Wave Silverberg work that should be read, will be read eventually. Let's do this one. Otis Albert Klein's The Swordsman of Mars. Klein was an early weird fiction, pulp fiction writer, contemporary with, most importantly, Edgar Rice Burroughs, with whom he is alleged to have had a running beef, although it's completely unsubstantiated, it's just a fan theory. People claim that ERB's Venus trilogy was published in response to these books, which allegedly he thought were direct ripoffs of the Princess of Mars series. A lot of fans said the same thing. It was actually Donald Walheim that came up with the theory in the first place and said that it was just purely speculation from the jump. So who's to say, but people say this is, I think, slightly more serious planetary romance a la Princess of Mars, but not seemingly especially highly regarded. It is a Yellow Peril book. Klein is described as, quote unquote, an amateur Orientalist and student of Arabic, interestingly. I guess there's a racialized aspect to this that is questionable. Again, Minesweeper. That's one of the downsides of reading a bunch of this older science fiction stuff, is that it's just suffused with these kinds of issues, and they are largely inescapable. Voyage to a Forgotten Sun, good example of that. Donald Feil, P-F-E-I-L. This is a kind of no-name, like, I don't know, a very obscure book from an obscure author. Apparently it's just shitty space opera that takes a turn in the last few pages of just being exposition about how fascism is correct. The Escape Orbit by James White. Actually, really interesting character. He was a Northern Irish hard science fiction writer, had beef, or not beef, but had a troubled relationship with John Campbell, who White portrayed as not liking his writing because it depicted favorable cultural exchange with alien races, and he considered Campbell to be a xenophobe. Many people considered Campbell to be a xenophobe. White was a committed pacifist. This is one of his more famous books, actually, Escape Orbit. The thing that he's most remembered for is being the pioneer of medical science fiction, wrote a series of medical SF books that are still considered like the benchmark works in medical science fiction. This is about a guy imprisoned by aliens who orchestrates a resistance among the other human factions that would otherwise have been at war with each other to arrange for an escape. It sounds kind of good. Also, White is interesting in that he was a hard science fiction writer who was given the nod by Moorcock's New World, had a bunch of his stories published alongside all the weirdo New Wave stuff, which I think was kind of unusual. Cecil Snyder III's The Hawks of Arcturus, his only book. I think it was like a nepotism situation where he was in a family or like knew a guy or something. It seems to be my recollection. Anyway, apparently this sucks. Everybody's review of this online is like, nice try. Please don't try again. One reviewer called it, quote, one of the worst pieces of science fiction he has ever read on a blog post. I guess it's like a historical curiosity, as is this one, although probably a better read. Amazing cover on this, Starbrat by John Morrissey. This is about a farm boy who gets kidnapped by aliens, sent to fight in a gladiatorial arena, and has to have a long odyssey back home. Another science fiction odyssey, a la Dumarest. Gladiator by Philip Wiley is a more important book than you would think. Probably you haven't heard of it. Philip Wiley was as much like a cultural commentator and essayist as he was a fiction writer. Is probably best remembered for When Worlds Collide. But also, I think this book seems like it's his real legacy, because a lot of people think this is the source material for Superman. It's about a scientist who comes up with a serum that, when injected into a person, gives them the physical abilities of ants and grasshoppers, super strong and can leap tall buildings in a single bound, and injects this woman who gives birth to a son who is essentially Superman, but it's another, like the new Adam, Superman who has a kind of ambivalent relationship with his own power, and who is alienated socially by his privileged position. And this was described by one reviewer as being, quote, as gritty as Frank Miller. And I think at some point, whenever I read one of these, I'm going to read the other one along with it for contrast. Gladiator was first. This is from the 1930s, I believe. Yeah, 1930. Very important book, and apparently underappreciated work that is of real literary quality, allegedly. Star Child by Frederick Pohl and Jack Williamson is uninteresting in that it's the middle book in not that interesting sounding dystopian trilogy, but interesting because it has cover artwork by a French surrealist painter named Jacques Weir, who also did my favorite cover of Case of Conscience by Blish. She only did 6 or 7 book covers, and all of them are just gorgeous. Some of my favorite cover artwork. If you run into one of his books, I think probably worth picking up just for the cover art. Also did a really pretty cover of The Legions of Space by Williamson, I think the title was. Ship of Strangers by Bob Shaw is compared a lot to Star Trek. It's episodes of human beings making first contact with aliens. Bob Shaw above average space opera, above average hard SF writer. I've had sort of a mixed response to some of his books, but wrote a book called The Palace of Eternity that I think probably is still my favorite ever space opera. The Best from Fantasy and Science Fiction, 9th series, edited by Robert P. Mills. This is the first of these that he edited after taking over from Anthony Boucher. And this one is notable in that it contains Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes, the short story that he later worked up into a novel, with a bunch of other people in here. William Tenn, someone I'm also interested in, Robert Heinlein, unfortunately, Damon Knight, Walter Tevis, Bester, Ted Sturgeon, The Man Who Lost the Sea. That's supposed to be one of his notable short stories. Roger Zelazny's Road Marks, a very new wave, very experimental book about a road that goes through time, and there's a wandering band of people traveling the road, and two of the people are sentient, walking, talking embodiments of poetry books. One of them is Leaves of Grass by Walt Whitman, and I think another one is not Baudrillard, it's Baudelaire. Has to be Baudelaire. Yeah. No, thank you. No, thank you. 27/6, The American Tricentennial, edited by Edward Bryant. He came up in the last of these haul videos. He's the obscure new waver that I was excited to have found, and this is a collection of short stories taking place in an American dystopian American future, and it's weirdly narrow. It's like a tall book. It's just slightly like 1 centimeter narrower than other books, which is its major claim to fame, I guess. Very few reviews of this, sort of mixed. I don't recognize a lot of people in here. And it's got a Walt Whitman quote on the first page. Harlan Ellison's in here, Vonna McIntyre's in here. Might keep it, might sell it, not sure. Other Dimensions by Robert Silverberg, editor, short story collection with a bunch of big names, including R.A. Lafferty, who I regret to inform you, apparently is a Holocaust denier. Came out last year. No, this year. It was really recent. Someone went into his private correspondence and noticed that there were a bunch of letters along those lines. This came out 1974, first print. Narrow Valley by Lafferty, Arthur Clarke, Alexei Panshin, Terry Carr, Silverberg, Weinbaum, Bester, just a stacked lineup here. Lots of people. It's just such a shame about Lafferty. I guess it's not like super a shock. Chronopolis by J.G. Ballard. Definitely keeping this one. This is just a short story collection of his. Really nice condition. Ballard's, I'm pretty close to having a full run of, I don't know actually what I'm missing. I'm really missing his more contemporary stuff, his like post-2000s works. But the vintage paperbacks, I have most of them. Dinosaur Beach by Keith Laumer. Among his more widely read still books, it's about time travelers going back to try to fix the timeline, and apparently misleading title, not a lot of dinosaurs in it, but a lot of people really love that book. Black Holes, edited by Jerry Purnell, co-author of Lucifer's Hammer. This is a mix of short stories and essays about black holes. Jerry Purnell described himself as having politics to the right of Genghis Khan. Cool shit, dude. Niven, not exactly a cherub himself, but I don't know. There's something about Purnell that just specifically rubs me the wrong way. This I am keeping. This is one of 2 novels that he put out, Half Past Human, the other one being The God Whale, which was not a direct sequel to this, but takes place in the same universe. This sounds so dope. He wrote this actually on his downtime when he was interning as a doctor in training, and just wound up publishing it. Totally wild sounding, post-apocalyptic, sort of Sword Planet-esque story about an underground Morlock subhuman species with 4 fingers that predate the like last remaining tribes of 5-fingered human beings who are trying to eke out an existence on the surface of a depleted and destroyed planet. I don't know, it sounds dope, and it's supposed to be pretty good, so I'm going to keep that one. I have a copy of God Whale that I'm going to hang on to as well. Earthchild by Sharon Webb, another medical science fiction writer. It's got a cool cover. Of no real serious historical significance, kind of mixed reviews. I'm probably going to end up selling this one, but just had a cool cover. This one also has a cool cover, A Walk with the Beast, edited by Charles M. Collins, a collection of Gothic horror stories. Don't really recognize a lot of people in here, but I also don't know that much about horror. Couldn't find a lot of info on this, but it does have the cool cover, the kind of Attack of the Killer Tomatoes cover. Another copy of this. I keep finding this book. It sounds like boring hard SF. The Trouble Twisters by Poul Anderson. A part of this ongoing series. It's a fix-up novel about, like, I don't know, atheist jugglers taking down organized religion in the future or something. I don't know, I made up the juggler part, but it doesn't sound particularly interesting, as many Poul Anderson books don't to me. Michael Frayn's A Very Private Life has a cool cover. He is a British playwright who apparently is one of the few authors to find success commercially, both in playwriting and in fiction writing. And this sounds like a sort of hackneyed 1960s version of The Machine Stops by E.M. Forster. It just sounds extremely, by now, cliche. I find dystopian books to be more boring than not. The Sunset Warrior by Eric Van Lustbader is his first book. Started as a science fiction writer and then moved into martial arts fantasy, best known for the Ninja books. This is notable in that it has a very cool Don Maitz cover. It is regarded as being very like 1980s action movie trope heavy, post-apocalyptic, planetary romance, sword and sorcery kind of science fantasy stuff. Not super duper interested in it, but I guess it's kind of cool. Laurie J. Marks is an interesting character, interesting writer. This is book 3 in a series. This is notable for dealing with gender issues and being one of the early instances of a book using neo-pronouns. Don't have the other 2 books, would consider reading it, and probably will at some point read this one, a fairly obscure fantasy book about 3 women trying to cope with a failed political revolution, living on farms out in the middle of nowhere, and apparently it's very serious and sad, but very, very highly regarded by the people who have read it. Decision at Duna by Anne McCaffrey, one of her early books. McCaffrey is the first woman to win a Hugo and the first woman to win a Nebula. Her literary reputation is not exactly sterling. Gets a lot of negative criticism, even from her own fans on Goodreads. This is sort of a Star Trekian Prime Directive story about a human colony on an alien world that they didn't realize was inhabited by aliens, and they have to decide what course to take, whether to abandon the planet or kill off all the aliens or find a way to cooperate with them. The Wizardry compiled by Rick Cook, a middle book in a series, the premise of which seems to be, what if magic worked like computer programming? And a lot of people on Goodreads just going like this to Rick Cook, just being like, please, please don't write any more bullshit like this. Ivanhoe Gambit by Simon Hawke, the first of a very long series, future countries fighting war in the distant past. Sort of sounds to me like the Glenn Cook, not Glenn Cook, god damn it, Barry Sadler, the Casca books a little bit, not one I'm really that interested in. The Diamond Age by Neil Stephenson. Apparently there's a villain called Dr. X in this. Frank Herbert's The White Plague. Takes place in Ireland during the Troubles. It's about a pandemic that only kills women. Again, sort of like mixed reviews. Herbert, I've tried to read stuff from him that isn't Dune, and I just have never done well with it, including Dune Messiah. The Machiavelli Interface by Steve Perry, part of the Matadora series. Steve Perry I actually know from the Aliens novelizations and the Aliens versus Predator books. Some of the first books I ever read. Some of the earliest science fiction books that I read. I'm not going to go to bat for them as good lit, and I haven't reread any of them in a long time, but this is original work from him. Apparently it's better than his movie novelizations. He was a figure like ADF who did a lot of movie tie-in stuff. Voyages, Scenarios for a Ship Called Earth, edited by Rob Sauer on behalf of, what's it called? Zero Population Growth National, so there was a group called Zero Population Growth, that's right. who were pretty well known during the 1970s for advocating that American families limit themselves to having 2 kids, part of this neo-Malthusian sort of like overpopulation panic. The lineup in here is nuts, though. It's J.G. Ballard, Frederick Brown, Ray Bradbury, Roger Zelazny, Pamela Zoline, Kit Reed. Might actually be good stuff. Apparently the like intro writing in there is pretty bad. John Maddox Roberts, Space Angel. Roberts started publishing science fiction stuff in the 1970s, was a Green Beret, and wrote this like juvenilia kind of throwback E.E. Doc Smith style space opera or Heinlein style space opera or adventure stuff. It's about a boy who winds up on a ship, is like a stowaway on a spaceship, ends up going on an adventure. I don't know, it's supposed to be good if unremarkable. Nancy Kress's Steel Across the Sky, maybe one of the more modern books that I have in this haul. Kress is a hard science fiction writer, known for writing books about genetics. Beggars in Spain is her most famous book. I accidentally read a spoiler for this that's awesome. It made me really want to read this. Apparently it's like not great by a lot of people's accounting, but it sounds really kind of cool to me. It's about aliens that settle on the moon and use people as emissaries to go on Star Trek style missions. And the aliens are called the Atoners. And what are they atoning for? Somebody asks, and the answer is cool, IMO. Jack Lovejoy's The Hunters, another pretty obscure book with a really cool cover. This is honestly a lot like Alien versus Predator or Prey, I think by Steve Perry actually. It's about a future on Earth, post-apocalyptic future, where aliens come and seed the planet with a bunch of big game species of aliens and also dinosaurs, and then they use it as a hunting ground for their own recreation, and the hunter aliens are these big killer cat guys. It's got wraparound art. Sick cover, I don't know, it sounds kind of cool. Little indie hit called Foundation by Isaac Asimov. A book that I still recommend you read. I like the Foundation books, at least the first 2 of them. Second Foundation, which is book 3 in the original trilogy, not as much, but I'm a Foundation apologist. Kite Man by Alfred Reynolds, a book of low consequence. It's a juvenile about a boy in a desert world flying around on a kite. Robert Reed's The Remarkables. Reed is compared to Silverberg and Gene Wolfe, and this apparently is not one of his better known books, not one of his more highly regarded books. This sounds to me a lot like a book called Kingdoms of the Wall by Silverberg, a book of his from the early 90s, one of the first science fiction books that I read in the run of science fiction books that led up to me starting this channel. It's about humans accompanying an alien race on an alien world during a rite of passage. It's like this pilgrimage with aliens. I don't know, it sounds kind of cool. Reed is an interesting sounding writer. This is book 6 in the Dragon Riders of Pern series, her most famous series of books, longest running, co-wrote a bunch of it, and then some other people picked up the mantle after she passed away, including Tom McCaffrey, her son. This, I think, would be the McCaffrey book that I actually would read. First in a series also, Ship Who Sang. It is a wild-ass premise. Young children who are born with disabilities are used as like the neural centers powering the intelligence of spaceships. So they are given mechanical artificial bodies in the form of spaceships that they kind of, their consciousness occupies. Some people understandably have some reservations about that aspect of the plot. One of the people who praised this book was Joanna Russ, who said basically like, yeah, it's stupid, whatever, but I like it, which is, I don't know, good enough for me. Get Off the Unicorn by McCaffrey, one of her best-selling books, was originally titled Get of the Unicorn, as in progeny of the unicorn, and then was retitled Get Off the Unicorn because of a misspelling error in internal documents at Ballantine. Maybe a fortuitous accident because this sold like multiple print runs when it was first published. It's a short story collection, also sort of like critically mixed. I've never really found anybody outside of my 6th grade teacher who really like went hard for Anne McCaffrey. To Ride Pegasus by Anne McCaffrey. It's got a pretty vintage cover. This is the first in the Talents series, right? Yeah. This is 4 novellas together about people in the future who have psychic abilities. Rena Vale's Beyond the Sealed World. Vale is another villainous shithead. She worked on or for the House Un-American Activities Committee and was the person who sold out John Steinbeck and Lucille Ball. And this is a dystopian book that sounds awful. It's about people living in a nanny state, rediscovering, you know, their masculine virtues or whatever. Seemingly everybody hates it, I think, as I probably would. Supermind by Mark Phillips. Sorry if I just deafened you by hitting the mic. This is a trilogy of books written by quote-unquote Mark Phillips, which is a pen name for Lawrence Janifer and Randall Garrett writing together. They only wrote these 3 books together. Very punny, apparently like comedic writing that was critically lauded at the time. This is a workup of a short story called The Nice Old Lady or something. What is it? I'm really not that interested in this, but I am kind of interested in Janifer still. I read a book from him called Blood World that I thought was really surprisingly good. And another person that gets the Malzberg nod. Emerald Eyes by Daniel Keyes Morin is a cyberpunk, somewhat obscure cyberpunk, first in a trilogy. It's got a cool-ass cover, I have to say. It does take place in a dystopian future where the United States goes to war with a United Nations dominated by the evil French. I think that is it. So most of this stuff, other than this relatively small handful of books here, it's going to be available on the Whatnot auction, and details will be linked below. I appreciate you watching if you made it this far into the video. Hope it gives you some ideas of books to read and books to not read. Cheers to you, and I'll see you soon.